We can move to the next item on the agenda, the preview of environmental sustainability and bond in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. Dr. Swift.
Thank you, President Johnson and trustees and members of the community. Happy 50th Earth Day here in Ann Arbor and in Ann Arbor Public Schools. You know, it was 50 years ago today, right here in Ann Arbor, that we celebrated the first Earth Day, and I think it's extremely auspicious that we would have this study session today. Mr. Lautzana has been preparing, as you all know. In fact, we selected Mr. Lautzana because, partly because he has many talents and skills and passions that make him an excellent match for Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor Public Schools. But one of the reasons was because of his deep commitment to the environment and to our planet. In the Ann Arbor Public Schools, we have a many-decade commitment to the environment and to the planet. As they say, we believed in that before it was cool. And now it's not cool, it's an emergency. And I appreciated all of our speakers this evening reaching out to speak to this issue. Mr. Lautzana shared the other day when we were going through some of our crisis planning that this kind of crisis planning that we've had to do with COVID is exactly the kind of situation that we could easily be in as a result of our environmental concerns and our environmental emergency. So we've long had an amazing environmental education program. We're so proud of many decades of that program. Our students think of their environmental education experience. When I talk to students, graduating seniors, they think of that as one of several defining moments of their experience in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, alongside Safety Town and other key moments. We have a vision to lead as an organization, to model as an organization best practice in our community, and also to perpetuate environmental best practice through our students who are environmentalists. And so it's with that context that we brought to the community as one of our 4 cornerstones of this 2019 bond to create sustainable and environmentally responsible schools and school district. And as you know, trustees, with an average age of 65 years and at least 2 decades of underfunding for facilities in the state of Michigan, we do have a challenge to bring our buildings to an environmentally responsible and sustainable place. And yet we are deeply committed to that goal. And Mr. Lautzana leads that effort alongside, I want to give a shout out to our 2 environmental education and environmental sustainability advisory groups, one of them led by Mr. Lautzana and one of them led by Ms. Jenna Bacalor. And so with that, Mr. Lautzana is sharing with us this evening what the board might consider as we look ahead to implementing the bond from an environmentally responsible and sustainable approach. And I know, trustees, this is our 2nd or 3rd study session this year on the bond, and I believe it's going to be one of the most exciting ones because of this topic. And so with that, we'll just turn it over to Mr. Lautzana, and I believe he's got his presentation ready to go there. Thank you, President Johnson and trustees.
Thank you, Dr. Swift. Good evening, trustees and Ann Arbor community. I'm just going to take a second here and hopefully, Dr. Swift, does that look good on your screen?
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you.
Great. So happy Earth Day, everyone. Pleased to be here on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, sharing this presentation with you. And I really appreciate Dr. Swift bringing up the relationship, I believe, between the current pandemic and our climate crisis. What I've witnessed and others have witnessed in the last 2 or 3 months is a massive mobilization of resources around the globe to address this pandemic. These resources have never been mobilized in my lifetime to this extent and around the world. This massive mobilization where we're seeing, for instance, General Motors committing to switch production to making ventilators in short order. Inventors like Dyson creating new ventilators for this pandemic. It is exactly this kind of worldwide mobilization that's needed to address climate change. And I'm hopeful that these systems and relationships and the sense of urgency that we currently have can transition to effective solutions to climate change. So I am going to move to the next slide. So we have quite a bit of material for you guys this evening. We'll review the 2019 bond campaign sustainability commitments. We'll talk about the development of the Ann Arbor Public Schools Sustainable Design Guidelines. Those will be based on a series of green building rating systems and some other considerations that will inform our design guidelines. We'll review the work of the Environment and Sustainability Advisory Committee, which was presented to the board, I believe it was last June. And then we will discuss how we will be reformatting that committee to support the work on the bond moving forward as a permanent committee in the district. So as Dr. Swift mentioned, there were 4 overarching goals in the 2019 bond campaign, and one of those was sustainable and environmentally responsible infrastructure. Tagline, create resilient schools for climate change. This is from the campaign brochure. For each of those goals, we had key themes and then the infrastructure to support those themes. These themes include creating optimized learning environments based on best practice and research to utilize natural and artificial light, fresh air, free from pollutants, maintain optimal temperature and acoustics to maximize cognitive function and productivity. And we've discussed that at length, the research around indoor environments in particular and how they affect well-being, cognitive function, and productivity. Preparing our schools to adapt to climate change, chart a course to carbon neutrality, create a culture that supports recycling and composting, promote biodiversity and healthy sites, utilize interior and exterior finishes that are long-lasting and require minimal maintenance, and do some demonstration projects at Freeman. Those are the themes from the campaign. And so the infrastructure that would support those themes is renovate all classrooms with modern systems that provide human-centric lighting, thermal, and acoustic environment with user control, design buildings for disaster resilience and passive survivability, install solar energy systems, utilize more efficient electric heating and cooling systems, install dimmable LED lighting, continue to upgrade the busing fleet. We're very excited about the 4 electric buses that will be arriving in October or in August this year. Create spaces in schools for the collection of recyclables and compost and exterior collection points. Create biodiverse ecologies on school grounds that support local ecosystems. Specify durable and long-lasting materials and install water management systems and other projects at the Freeman Environmental Education Center. So that's a quick recap of the bond commitments around sustainability that were made to our community. And so in order to create a framework by which we can deliver on those commitments, we will be developing a sustainable design guideline. Working with our professional partners, including architects, engineers, and others, we will develop an AAPS Sustainable Design Guideline document that contains both prescriptive and performance-based criteria for presentation to the board in late fall 2020. Prescriptive and performance-based criteria, essentially a prescriptive criteria would be something like, we will only specify paints that have zero VOCs, zero volatile organic compounds. A performance-based criteria is 1 month after occupancy, we will test the air in the school and we will find below a certain threshold of volatile organic compounds in the air in the building. So that's a prescriptive versus a performance-based criteria. We will develop the sustainable design guidelines drawing from best practices from green building rating systems and other sources. And it will specifically be designed to reflect the values of the AAPS community, our local climate and weather, and our local regulatory environment. And so a green building rating system is essentially a certification or a rating system that considers the broader environmental projects of the impacts of the entire project. And these are typically, they have extensive and ongoing peer and industry review. They are designed to drive market transformation. They're designed to push the edges of what's possible given current technology to the next level. They often use a combination of both prescriptive and performance-based criteria. And typically they have categories and you earn points in different categories. And when you get enough points accumulated, you earn certification or another kind of recognition. So we'll be looking at these systems. There are many others that we'll look at, but these are some of the most utilized, and they cover a wide range of topic areas. LEED, CHPS, the Living Building Challenge, the Well Building Standard, Net Zero Energy and Zero Energy Ready certification, Zero Waste certification, and the Sustainable Sites Initiative. So probably the most common or well-known of these systems is LEED. LEED has been around for quite some time, and they have 6 categories in which a project can earn points: sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation in operations and regional priority. And the more points you earn, you go from certified to silver to gold and eventually to a platinum certification. This ends up looking something like this. This is a checklist for the LEED for schools, and there are all the points. And zooming in just a little bit on that, it ends up looking something like this. There are prerequisites. Those are the prereq is here, and then these are the points that the person they think they can get, and these are the points they don't think they can get in efficient landscaping, wastewater technologies, water reduction, and then these are some of the energy points: on-site renewable energy, enhanced commissioning, etc. So you add up your points, and then you would earn your certification. And this ends up looking something like this. This is a elementary school in Maryland with LEED Gold certification. One of the requirements in LEED is that the majority of the building is daylit, and that you don't have to use a lot of artificial light. So you see all of the natural light that's provided in these spaces. The glass here is allowing this area where these folks are sitting to have natural light. If this was a solid wall, they would not have access to that light. Though the pictures don't represent it, this project would have very low to no toxicity materials and would be very energy efficient. CHPS was developed, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools was developed specifically with schools in mind. It has a total of 250 possible points and a minimum of 110 points to earn certification. You can see the categories here on the right. These are the different categories. And CHPS also has a little bit more of an operations and maintenance focus, more of a performance-based criteria than LEED has. And again, it has been designed specifically for schools, and it has, these are their books. One of the areas that this system is very strong in understanding how to maximize health and performance of students and staff. Again, it's very specific to schools, They also cover other more traditional things, conserving energy, water, minimizing waste and pollution and things like that. So the Living Building Challenge is another exciting program that's out there. It really it imagines a building's role as moving from having negative environmental impacts to net positive environmental impacts, so that the building is actually contributing to making the environment healthier as it operates. And so the orange on this chart here, that's the negative impacts, and the sort of yellow, that's positive impacts. These vertical lines, dashed lines, this is a code minimum building. This is sort of a basic green building, a high performance building. And when you get to this point, at the inflection point of these curves, that's a net zero. So it has no negative and it has no positive impact on the environment. It's kind of neutral to the environment. The Living Building Challenge imagines moving buildings into this net positive space. This is their matrix for the Living Building Challenge. You can see, place or site, water, energy, health and happiness, indoor environmental factors, the materials, very strong on materiality, the system, and then equity and beauty are kind of unique categories to the Living Building Challenge that are not shared in some of the other ones. And that can end up looking something like this. There are not a lot of school buildings that have yet gone for the Living Building Challenge, and the Living Building Challenge is a performance-based system, so you need to operate the building for a period of time and then do these performance-based measurements that you measure your indoor air quality and other things, and that you have hit the targets of the program. So this Wild Lake Middle School in Maryland is pending Living Building Challenge certification, but it is certified as a net zero energy school. And so they have a highly efficient school building. And you can see they've got solar panels out here by the tennis courts, plus obviously the entire school is covered with solar panels to help them get to that level of efficiency. The WELL Building Standard is another newer building green building rating system. They're again focused much more on on-site testing and performance review, and is very much focused on the user experience, the well-being of the building occupants. And so you'll see they have some of the regular things here: air, water, light, but they also have nourishment as a unique category that they look at. What are the food systems? How much healthy food is available in the building for occupants, and also how the mind and how the building impacts your sense of well-being, and community. How does the building help to strengthen community connections and interactions? WELL being relatively new, it has not moved outside of the office environment so far, but these are some of the office renovations that have earned WELL certification, and you can see lots of plants or biophilia, lots of different options in terms of where people work. So you're not always stuck at your cubicle or your desk, but you can move around the office freely and sit in different locations, and things like natural light and good air quality. So net zero energy and net zero energy ready. Essentially, if we look at the this chart on the right, the way to reach net zero is you add up all of your consumption of energy in the building, from lighting, space, cooling, heating, hot water, fans, pumps, electronics, and computers. You add up all that is your building's load. And then to achieve net zero, you drive that load as low as you possibly can, and what load you still have, you produce renewable energy either on or off site to offset that load, that minimized load that you have. Net zero energy ready buildings are ones that do have that very high level of energy efficiency, However, they could not afford at the time the renewable energy systems, but they have a plan once funds are available to add the renewable energy to get their building to zero. The Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Laboratories have both issued very comprehensive guides to help project teams achieve net zero, specifically in schools. These are great resources. So the formula, again, for a net zero energy facility or a net carbon facility is pretty simple. You drive your energy efficiency. I think one of our public commentators even alluded to this. You drive your efficiency as low as you can get it, and then whatever remaining small amount of load you have, you offset that with renewables. The design for a building that is able to meet that, the formulas, it has a lot of components, but these are the main components that everybody uses to get to that. You have to have a very efficient building envelope, so you're controlling the movement of air and temperature in and out of the building. You're allowing ample provision for daylighting, so you're minimizing your use of daylight or artificial lighting. You're preparing your system for passive heating and cooling and ventilation, so you're taking advantage of that September day when it's perfectly nice, 65, 72 degrees outside, and you're minimizing your use of energy in those times when you don't really need it, and the environment around us is providing sufficient thermal conditions. Then having efficient systems such as your lighting systems, your mechanical systems and equipment, and then a very sophisticated control system so that when you do use energy is when you absolutely need it, and it's only using as much as you need for that moment. And then once you've gotten to that point, then fill in the rest with renewables. And so this is what that looks like. This is New York City Public Schools, the Kathleen Grimm School of Leadership and Sustainability. This is the first net zero school in New York City Public Schools. And you can see, again, the theme of there's solar panels on this facade, and then it wraps up the building, and all of this is solar. They have these wonderful classrooms, so that the ceiling here is tilted on intentionally. The light that's coming through these upper windows carries back, hits this ceiling, and then bounces down into the room so that you don't need to turn the lights on typically in this classroom because of this tip ceiling and the high light, the high glass here. You notice there's also transom glazing at the far wall. That's to allow more light to move beyond the classroom into the hallway. And you can see some of the same strategies here. They've got some shading devices to control the sun. The sun isn't always your friend. If it's the wrong time of the day on the west side of the building, 3 o'clock, you need to have ways to also control the sun. So that's a very exciting project. And today, with our current technology, both our sort of material technology and our design technology, achieving net zero in a new school construction is a very realistic goal. It does take additional effort, it does take additional engineering, but it's not an unreasonable goal. When we get to retrofitting existing buildings, that starts to be more of a challenge. And we'll talk about that a little bit here. Another one of these newer systems, and there are other zero waste systems out there, and we'll look at all of them. This is the same idea. You've got 39 points in 15 categories. You earn points in different categories, and then you can become certified as a zero waste facility or organization. Some of the things that most of us are familiar with: reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, diversion. This one is really interesting: upstream management. That is ensuring or investigating to make sure that when you recycle something, that it actually goes to the intended purpose. So if you're recycling plastic, it actually gets recycled properly and goes back in as a useful item into the world. And then finally, the Sustainable Sites Initiative. This deals with the outsides of buildings, how you manage your site to be most environmentally friendly. And so they have their 10 categories and 135 points. Things like water, soil and vegetation, materials, human health and well-being, construction, operations and maintenance, education, performance monitoring, and innovation. This ends up looking something like this. This is a Center for Sustainable Landscapes in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This program has not really made it to the K-12 sector yet, but again, inside of those 135 points is a lot of best practice industry knowledge that we intend to draw from as we develop our plans for how we manage our sites in the most sustainable way possible. And so you'll see there's green roofs here, lots of vegetation, very nice water feature, the human element so that people are interacting with the environment outside of the building, and lots of solar and other amenities at this site in Pittsburgh. So there's a couple of other items out there that don't strictly fall into a rating system, but that are important for us to understand. Life cycle assessment, environmental product declarations, the notion of embodied carbon versus operational carbon in buildings, and again, human-centric design. And I'll talk briefly about each of these. A life cycle assessment is essentially a cradle-to-cradle analysis of a material or a product or a building and what impact it has from a carbon standpoint. So beginning with the resources, the natural resources that would go into a building, concrete, wood, steel, how that's processed, the iron ore, how it's manufactured into steel beams, how that's distributed to your facility, how it's installed, how you use it, and then at the end of life, what happens to that carbon that went into that. So it's adding up all of that carbon impact from the transportation to the mining, to the processing, to getting it into your building, and then you using it, and then what happens at the end of its life. So the full carbon picture of all of your building and your sub-building products. Environmental product declarations are starting to take root in the environmental green building space. Essentially, an EPD is an independently verified and registered document that communicates transparent and comparable information about the environmental life cycle impact of a product. So for instance, if you were trying to select between two carpets and you had an EPD for both carpet products, you could then make a comparison and judgment as to which one you wanted to select based on your priorities around environmental sustainability. The process is pretty simple. You conduct the LCA, the life cycle assessment, put together the declaration form. It goes to be verified by a certification agency, and then it is registered. And then that becomes something that designers and owners and others can look at the EPD and make a determination and a selection of different products based on environmental criteria. So the notion of embodied carbon versus operational carbon is very important for us to understand. Now, so what we have here, this blue line, this is the carbon, this is the embodied carbon. That's the carbon that's essentially sunk into that building. That's the carbon that went into the atmosphere because we built a school, let's say. So there was a certain carbon associated with building that school. And then if it's number 3, a net zero school, then there's no new carbon. That's the total of the carbon over the life cycle of that school building. If we build a new building and it's energy efficient and there's some decarbonization of the grid that happens over the next 10 to 20 years, there's additional carbon coming into the atmosphere because of our operation of that building, but it diminishes over time as the grid decarbonizes. If we build just a regular building, not an efficient construction, our carbon continues to grow over time as we operate that building, and the operational carbon can actually outpace the embodied carbon over time. And that's a new construction scenario. So if we look at the choice between renovating and building new, essentially, do we keep a building or do we replace it? From a carbon standpoint, these are the calculations that become important. Renovating the building, the green line going up, will use less carbon than building new, because there's some things we're going to keep. We're going to keep the concrete footings. We're going to keep the steel. We're going to keep some of the elements. So there'll be incrementally less carbon in the retrofit. But because of the constraints of retrofitting buildings, it will be very difficult to get to net zero. So you will have that operational carbon going up over time. So you will be essentially pushing more carbon into the atmosphere with this retrofitted building, even though you had less carbon in the beginning. And the calculation becomes, when does this green dash line cross this solid blue line? Is that at 20 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 50 years? And that's the calculation from a carbon standpoint that you would make on that decision to renovate or replace. Importantly, though, there are some complicating factors in existing buildings, such as programmatic constraints, rooms that are too small, rooms that are in the wrong place, other things like that in existing buildings. There are legacy environmental hazards in existing buildings, and there is antiquated infrastructure that is very difficult to replace, such as old pipes and ductwork and things like that. So it's a complex decision, but that's essentially the difference between embodied carbon and operational carbon in a building context. And finally, human-centric design. Our number one thing is to educate the next generation, and studies have repeatedly shown that student health impacts student thinking and ultimately impacts student performance. And at this link here, forhealth.org, there is an abundance of research available for review that looks at everything from lighting to acoustics to thermal comfort, air quality, and other things, and how that has a direct scientific link to student performance, teacher satisfaction and well-being, and other metrics. And really that research looks at 4 areas: how you hear, how you breathe, how you see, and how you feel, and how that impacts how you think and you learn. In a poor acoustic environment, it's been shown that sometimes students towards the back of the room can't understand the words that the teacher is saying. It becomes muffled as it reverberates around the room. And so that student is not hearing 100% of what's being taught, and that can be very problematic. How we breathe is also equally important. In particular, particulate and things like volatile organic compounds and other toxins in the air can cause asthma outbreaks, can cause absenteeism and other things like that. How a person sees and their access to views into daylight is also very important. Having the right amount of light and the right kind of light has been shown to drastically improve performance on tasks and things like that. And probably the easiest one to understand is how we feel. If a student is too cold or they're too warm, they're going to be distracted. Their cognitive function has been shown to suffer significantly in high temperatures and in low temperatures. And all of that, managing these factors properly in our classrooms and in our school buildings enhances our students' ability to think and learn. So I wanted just to review what we brought to the board last June. We had an Environment and Sustainability Advisory Committee that met throughout the 2018-19 school year. We met at least a dozen times and worked through, what are all the things the school district can do around environmental sustainability. We worked through over 50 different things, went through some prioritization exercises, looked at some case studies from around the country with other school districts, and these 11 items were selected by the group as the most important short-term priorities And the items that are bolded here were felt that those were the best place to start. And so we have a district-wide sustainable schools program, use our campuses and buildings as a living learning laboratory, reduce utility consumption, utilize elementary schools as centers for neighborhood engagement, bringing people together through sustainability initiatives, enhance and repair the current recycling program, plant trees for shading, establish building energy improvement plans, performance criteria for new construction, manage environmental factors for student health, wellness, and performance, enhance the gardening program, and adopt a board sustainability policy. And I'm happy to say we've made a little bit of progress on this list. We have adopted sustainability policy. We're working on the recycling program with the help of a grant from the state of Michigan. We're halfway through our 400 tree planting program, and we have been continuing to work on reducing utility consumption, and we've received over $110,000 in rebates from DTE for our work around energy efficiency. We have a long way to go, but we've got a little bit of a roadmap here from our group that we're making our way through. The group also had mid to long term recommendations. These were felt that they were a priority, but that some of the items on the other list were more of a priority, or were they sort of needed to happen first before these other things could happen. So the Sustainable Schools program focusing on climate change, clean energy plan, energy guidelines, and composting, and indoor environment and grounds recommendations as well. So moving forward, starting in May 2020, the Energy and Environment and Sustainability Advisory Committee will be relaunched with a new structure to accept organizational level applications for membership on the bond ESAC committee. So the thinking here is that an organization like University of Michigan, the Ecology Center, World Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club, the Teachers Union, PTOs would essentially submit applications for people to represent their organization on this committee. The group will review bond program progress relative to environmental and sustainability goals. It is anticipated that organizational partnerships and collaboration will be enhanced under this new structure. The group will be selected over the summer of 2020 and will convene quarterly starting in the fall of 2020 on an ongoing basis. Again, this group would be formed to review and advise our sustainability progress. And this is my favorite slide of the show. I had to make one of these. Happy 50 years of Earth Day. And thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, trustees. Thanks, Emil. Thanks, Dr. Swift.
Thank you.
And everyone, that was really informative. And we look forward to further updates, and the community can continue to, or we'll communicate to the community as we're forming these different committees and planning our outreach to get feedback. And so thank you.